Get ready for an extraordinary tale that sounds like something straight out of a surreal yet entirely true chapter of history. In a showdown where nature meets military might, we present the astonishing story of Emu beat the Australian army. It's a remarkable narrative that unfolded in the Australian outback, where a group of emus, those flightless giants, waged a unique and unexpected battle against armed forces. Join us as we dive into this quirky, often hilarious, and utterly unforgettable episode in Australia's military history. It's a wild ride that you won't want to miss. The emu, a big flightless bird, is one of Australia's national symbols. However, they were not always regarded as a harmless sign of national identity. Previously, they were regarded as pests that threatened the livelihoods of farmers who had to coexist with these creatures. What did the emus do to deserve armed conflict? Well, the farmers in Western Australia had been struggling with crop failures since the Great Depression, and their problems were made worse tenfold by the arrival of 20,000 emus moving inland during their breeding season. Until 1922, the birds were protected as a native species, but now that they were classified as vermin, all bets are off. The farmers expressed their worries to the government, which dispatched a deputation of ex-soldiers, many of whom were now farmers from World War I, who demanded the use of machine guns to combat the emu. In 1932, the Australian government adopted a tough stance against the problem, deploying the military. What followed became known as the Great Emu War. The origins of the Great Emu War can be traced back to the First World War and the treatment of returning veterans. For Australia, the First World War would be the worst conflict it had ever witnessed, with Australian deaths exceeding those of the Second World War. The Gallipoli campaign was a slaughter for Australia, and it is remembered in Australia in the same manner that the Sama is remembered in the United Kingdom or France. Australia suffered around 210,000 casualties throughout the war, with 61,519 killed or dying as a result of their wounds. These were several losses for a country with a population of less than 5 million people. Many veterans returned home with severe, debilitating wounds that made it difficult for them to find work. To say the least, the government's response was despicable. It provided no assistance to its injured heroes returning from the horrors of Gallipoli. But when the reality of Gallipoli became known to the Australian public, pressure on the government to act grew. Under such pressure, the government eventually designed a system that would not only assist veterans, but also feed Australia. Veterans were encouraged to become farmers once the area was divided into tiny parcels of land. Thousands of people took up the challenge, but it was doomed from the start. Most of the time, the dirt was poor. There was always the fear of vermin. The veterans had little to no farming experience, and each plot was only around 10 acres in size, which was hardly enough for subsistence, let alone profit. Despite this, many thousands of people have settled around the country. Around 5,000 people were placed in Western Australia, where wheat was the best crop for the circumstances. And it was in this location that the emus' issues emerged. Emus began ravaging Western Australia's farmlands in 1918, and by 1922, their protected status had been revoked, and the government categorized them as vermin to be destroyed. Local farmers took up arms in an attempt to deter the emus from eating and trampling their crops. The emu population, on the other hand, was massive, and the birds were astonishingly robust. A single bird was usually shot numerous times before it recognized what had happened. However, the emus were only one of several issues. The farms had been a total failure. By the mid-1920s, it was obvious that the farm idea had failed. Tens of thousands of farmers had been thrown into difficulty and poverty as a result of their production. Under these deplorable conditions, alcoholism and suicide rates surged. Wheat prices fell throughout the decade, and the 1929 stock market crash in the United States, which led to the Great Depression, impacted Australia harder than the United States. Wheat prices, which were falling already, were abruptly cut in half, and unemployment in Australia increased to 32%. Then came the drought. A quarter of all resettled farmers in Western Australia gave up and went away. They'd had enough of it. Australia, on the other hand, required the wheat. Prime Minister James Cullen pledged a subsidy for these farmers, only to revoke the guarantee during harvest season. Then he announced another subsidy, but before it could be implemented, he lost the following election, and the new Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, swiftly cancelled the subsidies. To make matters worse, the emus had demolished sections of the rabbit-proof fence, allowing rabbits to enter. The Great Emu War began on November 2nd when the Australians sprung into action after spotting advanced portions of the emu horde. They attempted to herd the emus into an ambush with the help of local farmers, but the birds did not keep together as intended and scattered, making them difficult targets. The Australians attempted again later in the day, after encountering a small flock, but with the same results. The emu losses are difficult to calculate because the birds tended to flee before dying to their wounds. Only about 30 emus had been killed by the third day. This was hardly a dent in a 20,000-man army. The next few days were likewise fruitless. When the emus sensed danger, they divided into smaller groups, each with one tall emu on the alert while the rest continued to destroy. Meredith and his troops installed their Lewis machine gun on the back of a truck. But this proved ineffectual since the ground was too rocky for both the truck and the gun to gain a spaced advantage. The Australian military was, of course, assisted by local farmers who attempted to herd the emus. A truck was brought in and used to run over and ram the birds. When one of the emus got its head hooked in the steering wheel, the driver panicked and crashed the vehicle. Meredith and his squad were withdrawn on November 8 due to negative press and poor performance in the field. According to the official report, around 300 emus were killed during the operation. The emus continued to destroy crops, while Western Australia's Premier, James Mitchell, joined the farmers in urging a new attempt to drive the emus away. The Great Emu War was about to resume. Meredith and his colleagues were reassigned to Western Australia on November 13. The attacks continued, with reports of up to 100 emus being murdered each week. Meredith was recalled on December 10 and the operation was completed. The commander claimed 986 killings with 9,860 bullets fired, with a further 2,500 people injured. This figure, however, is hotly debated and is likely to be greatly exaggerated. As we wrap up this incredible journey into the quirky annals of history, we hope you've enjoyed the incredible story of emus beat the Australian Army. Sometimes, the most astonishing tales emerge from the unlikeliest of scenarios, and this one is certainly no exception. Nature's resilience and the unpredictable challenges it can present have left us with a story that will be remembered for generations. We hope you've been entertained, educated, and perhaps even left with a newfound respect for the tenacious emu. If you enjoyed this adventure as much as we have, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more captivating tales from the past. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable expedition through the realms of history.